She stood there, silent and unremarkable, while they laughed behind her. No one knew she was the new bank director. When she revealed her position, the room froze. The loudest laugh was silenced. What happened next changed everything. But let's start from the beginning. It was a typical morning at the downtown bank. The sound of keyboards tapping and phones ringing filled the air, each employee absorbed in their monotonous tasks. Among them, Jessica Moore walked through the entrance. A poised, confident black woman in her early 40s, she moved through the lobby with an almost imperceptible grace, unnoticed by most. Her professional attire, though modest, carried an air of quiet authority. As she passed the receptionist's desk, Tom, a young bank clerk with a habit of making snap judgments, eyed her with a smirk. He leaned toward his colleagues, his voice low but audible. "Who does she think she is? Probably just another assistant," he chuckled, his words dripping with condescension. The others exchanged looks, their faces twisted with amusement. Sarah, a senior employee, couldn't help herself. She shook her head, rolling her eyes. "Some people think they can just walk in here and make a difference," she scoffed, her tone thick with dismissal. They continued their gossip, completely unaware of the truth. Jessica wasn't just another assistant. She wasn't even another regular employee. She was the new director, the one they had been hearing about in passing rumors. But in that moment, none of them knew it. All they saw was a woman with the quiet demeanor of someone they could easily overlook, the kind of person they could mock without consequences. Jessica's walk to the back offices was steady, her face impassive as she overheard the whispers. The indifference didn't seem to faze her. She had seen it all before, this tendency for people to judge others based on appearances, to underestimate those who didn't immediately fit their narrow expectations. She reached her office door, paused for a moment, and then opened it. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her with a soft click. For now, everything was exactly as it should be. But in time, things would change. The ripple effects of their mockery would not go unnoticed. And Jessica had every intention of making sure they knew exactly who she was. The hours dragged on, and Jessica remained largely invisible to the staff. She moved through the offices, her presence barely acknowledged. As she quietly observed, taking notes on the company's operations, the employees carried on with their day as if she were just another shadow in the background. Whispers floated around her, just loud enough to reach her ears. "She's just another person in a suit, pretending to be important," one employee snickered, glancing at her as she passed. Their words were sharp, dripping with arrogance, but Jessica did not flinch. She walked on, her steps measured, as if she had not heard them at all. The ridicule didn't stop there. Tom, growing bolder in his assumptions, began to spread a rumor with his usual smug grin. "She won't last long," he said, his voice loud and sure. "They only brought her in because of her skin color. Diversity quotas, you know? That's all this is." His friends laughed in response, their voices echoing in the hallways, filled with the kind of ignorance that only made their small-mindedness more glaring. Jessica continued her quiet circuit through the office. Every word, every glance that tried to diminish her, only seemed to fortify her resolve. The staff saw a woman of color, in an office full of white faces, and immediately assigned her to a box. A stereotype. A token. Someone who couldn't possibly have earned her place. But Jessica didn't react. She didn't engage with their ignorance. She didn't need to. Her silence was not submission. It was strength. The words of those around her didn't break her. They only made her more certain of her path. They were blind to who she truly was, but soon enough, they would see. She moved with quiet dignity, her eyes scanning the office, taking in every detail, making a mental map of every room, every employee, every interaction. She knew exactly what was happening, and more importantly, she knew exactly how she would change it. The mockery didn't affect her. It fueled her determination. They thought they had her figured out, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Around lunchtime, the office buzzed with the usual chatter as the employees filed into the conference room for a meeting. It was just another routine gathering, a break in the day, and they gathered with casual indifference, expecting nothing more than an update on the bank's ongoing projects. But then, the door opened, and the room quieted. A tall man stepped inside, his presence commanding the space without effort. His suit was sharp, his movements measured, and as he stood next to the projector, his voice cut through the low murmurs of the employees. There was an edge of anticipation in his tone, an unspoken weight behind his words. "I'd like to introduce you to your new director, Jessica Moore." A stunned silence fell over the room. The words seemed to hang in the air, thick with a sudden, undeniable tension. The faces of the employees, previously animated with casual chatter, froze as they turned to face Jessica, who stood quietly by the door. She walked forward with the same calm, composed demeanor she had carried all morning. But now, something was different. Her presence, once muted and almost overlooked, seemed to expand in the space. The weight of her new title settled over her like a mantle, bringing a gravity to her every step. Her eyes swept the room slowly, making deliberate contact with each person. For the first time, she demanded their attention, not through loud words or gestures, but through sheer presence. Her gaze was steady and unwavering, and as her eyes met theirs, none of the employees dared to meet her stare for too long. They shifted uneasily, eyes dropping, avoiding the inevitable recognition of the truth now before them. Tom, the loudest of the mockers, felt his stomach tighten as a wave of realization washed over him. His earlier confidence faltered, and the laughter he'd shared with his colleagues now felt hollow, echoing in the back of his mind. The weight of his words, once careless and dismissive, now pressed down on him with suffocating force. Quickly, Tom tried to cover his mistake, muttering a half-hearted apology under his breath. But the damage had been done. The woman they had so easily written off as just another token hire was now standing before them as the director. She was not someone they could ignore or dismiss anymore. The room had already shifted, and so had their perception of her. The truth hung heavily in the air. Jessica Moore was not just another employee. She was their leader. Jessica addressed the team with clarity and authority, outlining her vision for the future of the bank. As she spoke, her words carried a weight of experience and intelligence that left no room for doubt. After the meeting, Sarah tried to approach Jessica, offering a weak apology, but Jessica simply nodded. She didn't need their apology. Her actions would speak louder than any words. Over the following weeks, Jessica proved herself to be an exceptional leader, transforming the bank's operations and turning its morale around. She implemented policies that encouraged growth, equality, and respect. The employees who had once ridiculed her began to look up to her, not just because of her position, but because of her ability to change things for the better. Tom, however, never forgot the sting of embarrassment. As the weeks passed, he slowly realized that the woman he had dismissed had become his boss. His once dismissive attitude gave way to guilt, and the humiliation he had caused her became his burden. In the end, justice was served, not just in her rise, but in his own realization of the consequences of his ignorance and prejudice.